wonderful administrator, and she will be leading the charge for the AFNA, which is the America's Netball, to be hosted in Jamaica next October. Howard McIntosh has information on sport that's unbelievable, which will help us in this discussion. But he's now the FIFA Development Officer assigned to CONCACAF, and he has been head of the Entertainment Advisory Board at the Ministry of Tourism and, well, Culture, Tourism and Entertainment. Bruce James, who you know is that wonderful analyst that you can learn everything from track and field. He's president and co-founder of MVP. And last but not least, Paulton Gordon. Paulton Gordon is the president of the Jamaica Basketball Association, and he is a lecturer at University of Technology. So combined, you know, we have a tremendous team, and we're happy to share with everybody that's online. I do understand we have some media people, and I know we have guests from as far as Antigua, because obviously this invitation went far and wide. I got it probably 15 times, Carolyn. So between you and your team from the Kiwanis group, you obviously did a fairly good job today. So we welcome everybody. Now, March 10, 2020, all our lives changed in Jamaica when the first case of the COVID-19 was reported. And since then, we have had to undergo what I call restricted living. In the sporting world, we all were affected, but globally, most leagues came to a halt last year this time. And by July 2020, when things returned, the athletes competed in empty stadiums, which means they had no fans, just officials. Another massive area impacted was revenues. So for example, March Madness, some of you who went to school in the States, lost $375 million. And collectively, they're suggesting that over $4.14 billion in revenue was lost globally. In Jamaica, cricket was the first to be affected as the 50 overs version of the senior league was going on, and that eventually stopped March 18. Track and field made some inroads, and Bruce will talk more about that. At the senior level, he had some meets, and even up to this year, 3 weekends of track and field meets went on without any reported breaches. And I'm putting that in the context of the announcements that we anticipate the Prime Minister will make between tonight and tomorrow. We know the rest of the story, but now with a few months to go, we have the Gold Cup for football, World Cup qualifiers, we have the Summer Olympic Games in July, World Rugby League, which is 193 days away, and a host of other international events. The Cricket West Indies, through the CPL, has had successful tournaments abroad and here in the region, and there's been no reported breaches. And by the way, the Jamaica ice hockey team only reported today that they qualified for the Latham Cup, which they will defend in Canada this October. And what this means is that our athletes must be prepared. But because it's a pandemic, an unusual thing, I'm going to start with Dr. Mansingh, who will actually offer us an overview of how bubbles and all of the restrictions that we have had to undergo. And he will now highlight for us what is the status as it relates to athletes operating in bubbles and the restrictions. Dr. Mansingh.
Thank you very much, Carol. And I'll try to put it as succinctly as possible. As you mentioned, the world came to a stop in March last year. And most of the world thought that this would be something like Chick V, which came, hit us, and would move on. Very quickly realized that this is more like dengue, something that's around and will rear its head from time to time. Bear in mind that never has there been a pandemic of this magnitude ever in history, be it of disease or of war. Yes, there were world wars which affected 2.5 continents, and there was a Spanish flu which took 3 years to spread across the world and nonetheless did not affect every continent. This is a pandemic that is affecting every single country in the world. So the first few weeks, and I have to say weeks, were taken in trying to understand what this was about and how we're going to respond to it. But it was quite clear early o'clock that if there's going to be any resumption of sport, it had to be calibrated both between what the sport demanded and what resources one had. So I'm happy to say that through Cricket West Indies, we were actually involved in the very first resumption of international sport, which, as you know, was the West Indies tour of England. And a few weeks after that, we were also host to the first international league to resume in sport, which was the CPL. Now, the difference was that when we went to England, we went to the second most infected country in the world and were able to conduct our tour there. And when we had the CPL in Trinidad and Tobago, where they at that time had no cases for 90 days almost, 81 days, we had invited people from 18 countries, every continent, and had 220 people that we were able to maintain in a bubble, which was supposed to last 2 weeks, but because of the general elections in Trinidad and the subsequent rise in number of cases, high of the bubble. The other thing was that they don't know very early on had stratified sports into low risk, medium risk, and high risk. And sports like squash and golf and tennis were rated low risk and had certain criteria which were set on resumption of sport. Sports like cricket and similar sports were medium risk, and then sports like football, netball, basketball, for obvious reasons, were high risk because you had close contact amongst persons. I'm not going to go into the details of how that went through. We'll discuss that as we go along as to how people responded to it. But what was clear is that those high-risk sports needed to have biosecurity of one sort or the other. What we did in cricket was, in England, we had a completely contained bubble whereby people were tested. They were flown by chartered flights throughout the Caribbean to Antigua, and there we had a chartered flight that took us to England, where we went straight into a hotel which was placed in the ground. It was situated in the ground rather, and all our activities were within the hotel, within the ground. We had no interaction with the outside community, and that lasted for about 6 weeks over 2 test matches. CPL was similar, except we were in one hotel and then moved to grounds at different parts of Trinidad and Tobago for training and for matches, but once again, all sealed within a bubble. So the first is what I call the contained bubble. The second one is what we call water and glove, meaning that everything is as if there's water in a glove, but the fingers went to different areas of the country. I say that because in England, for example, by the expenses that were involved in flying chartered flights and testing, and I can tell you that it almost cost £1 million for them to test athletes, cricketers that summer. They actually earned £300 million from TV rights and other sponsorships, which otherwise would have been lost if we were not proactive about restarting sport. Likewise, at the CPL, by having a bubble, we're able to ensure people got their salaries, even though they took a voluntary cut. We're able to satisfy our sponsors, and we're able to put a competition on the screen that attracted far more viewers than ever before, because obviously it was the only cricket going around at the time. And I'll pause to say that, well, I'll just end by saying that this is the sort of approach that we had suggested for the high-risk sports like basketball, netball, and football, along with a strategy for the low-risk and medium-risk sports for Jamaica. But unfortunately, I don't think that was adhered to. Cricket did start in Jamaica as far as training was concerned with very good protocols. But unfortunately, I think that stratification didn't come across properly, because of which competitions have not been held, because of which a lot of revenue has been lost. So Carol, thank you very much, and I'll pause at this point for further discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Mansing. I think you gave an overall review of what would have been international and regional and local to some extent. I'm probably going to skip and not acknowledge any order, but because Bruce James was successful in hosting some track meets last year, and he's pretty much involved in a number of things. Plus, by sending athletes, and he represents an important sport that we have in the Olympics this year. I'm going to give him the second option to speak, where he gives us an overview of the status of what track and field is faced with now. And feel free to talk about champs if you may, Mr. James. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening, moderator Carol, fellow panelists, President Lydia, distinguished Kiwanians, other Kiwanians, and ladies and gentlemen all. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I thank you for this invitation. The question that was asked of me is, has the delay in restarting the sports industry cost us too much? By definition, for something that costs us too much, it means you can't afford it. The fact that we've been able to host a number of local track and field meets here in Jamaica, the fact that a number of Jamaican athletes have been able to compete internationally in track and field, and that the fact that right now, as we speak, Jamaica is preparing to send a complete team of athletes to a world event, the World Relays in Europe, in Poland specifically, at the end of this month, suggests have found a way to afford it. Therefore, up to this point, I would say the delay in restarting the sports industry has not cost us too much in the world of track and field here in Jamaica so far. However, Carol and everybody else, I will point out to you, if we are not able to restart competition for our senior athletes and our high school athletes, if we are not able to host international track and field meetings here in Jamaica, if we are not able to host our Olympic trials here in Jamaica, if we're not able to have boys and girls champs, which I have to tell you, I believe is in some degree of jeopardy right now, if we're not able to send a team to the Olympic Games in Tokyo, then at that point, Carol, I would submit that the cost has been too much. At this point, though, we have found a way in track and field to continue. I am actually hoping that this weekend we will have the restart of track and field competition here in Jamaica by way of an event called Velocity Fest 9, which will be the 9th of the events that we've started last year. If that happens, it gives me hope. Track and field is distinct from a number of the events that involve a lot of contact, and therefore, the answer to the question for now, and I have a number of other points, but you asked us to just start with an opening comment, is that so far, track and field, the cost has not been too much, but there are lots of things that need to happen in the next really month to 3 months. And if they don't happen then, we could be in some jeopardy.
Thank you very much, Bruce. And that puts it in a good context, because when Dr. Mansing spoke in the early part, he spoke about low, medium, and high risk. And I think track and field and cricket to some extent, and of course golf and some of the other sports were low risk. So we appreciate that information, and we look forward to Velocity Fest this weekend. I'm gonna skip into the one of the high risk, netball, and possibly, but before I do, the sport fraternity is joining, and it would be remiss of me not to welcome them. So, for example, we have one of our assistant coaches from the West Indies team, Andre Coley, who is online. Zoral Basti is online from Antigua. And I see several people from the sports medicine and other fraternities. UTEC, University of the West Indies, the Jamaica Olympic Association, GC Foster, and I will acknowledge, and I think gymnastics is also on. I will continue to acknowledge the people as I go along. Simone, I'm gonna call on you because netball didn't get quite the start. The national team was in training, had a tour to England postponed, or I would say postponed, but still face a considerable amount of risk. Can you give us an update on where netball is at the moment?
Thanks, Carol. Thank Madam President. Thanks for having me, other member of the Kiwanis Club, my other panelists, and just guests who are here tonight. So unfortunately, netball falls, as you rightly said, Carol, in the high risk category. Of course, we have bodies banging, and because of the contact, it would of course fall there. Now, as it relates to netball in Jamaica, I wish I could say the same thing that James Bruce just mentioned, but no, netball, right now there's actually no netball playing, and there has not been any netball in the country for a year, exactly a year. So since the pandemic, last year the league was cancelled, and this year again it seems that the league may be cancelled again, and that's our local league, including the regular clubs as well as the league. So that's it for our local community netball leagues. As it relates to the national team, however, you did mention a cancellation of it's a postponement. You're right. It's a postponement of the English League series that we had in January against England because of the new strain and of the virus and in England. That was also postponed. The only saving grace, if we should even call it that, is that we have 7 and 4, 11 national players who are playing in Australia and England. So that is the only thing that, because Jamaica, in the top 5 countries, Jamaica is the only country who is not playing any netball right now, any league at all. So the only training or the only preparation the team has for anything to come in the next international calendar year for netball is Zoom. And
I think we're experiencing a little difficulty. We'll hopefully get back to Simone in a little while. So I know, for example, the America's Federation of Netball, we were planning to have a America's Cup in Jamaica. Jamaica is going to be the host of that tournament next October. And I think South Africa is due to come here October of this year. So there could be some amount of netball. All right, switching lanes a bit. I'll say football for the last, but I'm gonna ask Paulton, because basketball, your national team went off to a tournament in Central America, Paulton, and I know you were also one of the high risks because of the contact and of course the unaffordability of the bubble. Can you give us a quick update on where basketball is at this moment?
All right, thanks, Carol. Thanks for having me. Like Simone, we are considered a high-risk sport as well, as was mentioned by Dr. Mansing. There's no doubt that the entire ecosystem of basketball has been impacted since last March. We were in the middle of our NBL, and we had to curtail that sometime in mid-March. So it's about a year, approximately, just over a year, in fact, that there has been no basketball being played at any level at all. We estimate that we have approximately 15,000 persons who play basketball from grassroots level to the elite level. And the impact has to be measured in both tangible and intangible ways. There are a number of persons who are employed to basketball in a contractual way, or referees, a lot of the coaches who coach at the club level, at the school level. If there's no basketball, they are not compensated. We estimate that fallout is about 40 to 50 coaches. The referees, the table officials, all of those persons are impacted. And I can elaborate on that a little bit more. But as Dr. Mansing said, the ideal situation is to have bubbles. There's no way we can afford a bubble system in Jamaica for basketball. There's not enough revenue in basketball to have a bubble system. Hence the issues of trying to roll out local basketball as a high-risk sport. You mentioned that the World Cup pre-qualifying is happening in El Salvador. That is correct. We were able to pull that together. It's not ideal because we wanted to have a 3 to 5 day camp. That could happen because of the approval system. Luckily or unluckily, the vast majority of persons who are participating in that event are based in North America. So they were able to practice, they were able to get certain things done. But again, I say it's not ideal because we are going into this tournament without any actual group playing as a group. The logistics of getting there is another issue. They have to do a PCR test 10 days before, 3 days before, then 3 days before you travel, another PCR test. And these are all costly. Thanks to the UWI, we have been able to get that done. But again, it has been a logistical nightmare. And then issues related to the transit and transportation in terms of new visa requirements. In terms of hello? In terms of the testing. Hello?
Apology, go ahead, please.
In terms of the testing procedure, all of those things have been an issue. We have some upcoming things. We have an Under 15 Caribbean Skills Challenge, which we are preparing for. We are hoping that we can get approval for that. The Under 17 team plays in Nicaragua in July. We are hoping to have training for that. So we are in dialogue with the ministry, with the ministries involved, to see whether or not we can get those going. I'll elaborate on the other things as we move forward, but for now, I'll keep it at that.
All right, thank you, Paulton. And of course, we save the best for last, and I'm exposing my bias here because so much of what happens in football will depend on really what we have in sports, specifically in Jamaica. Cricket is the #1 in the region because it covers everybody, but certainly our biggest sport asset is football. And Howard McIntosh sits in the CONCACAF seat, but is close to the Jamaican situation where all kinds of things are happening. There's a World Cup qualifier, there's a Gold Cup, and there's also the Women's World Cup that will crop up. But there's been some changes administratively, and we now know that some of the things have been settled. But just give us an update as we say hello to all the other members joining in. I see GC Foster and the teams rolling in. Thank you for joining us. And President Lydia, you're having an overflow of guests in your meeting today. But Howard, just give us a quick update on what contains from the CONCACAF level. I see you have announced your Gold Cup final venue today. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, and all the Kiwanians, President Lydia, friends from the region, and of course, all of my brothers and sisters. One love. I noticed that you said you're saving the best for last. So I hope you record that. I will tell you, Carol, I will use that again. I'm going to then take a privilege, because even when I was asked to do this presentation, some persons, when they saw the flyer, that seems to have been heavily circulated, asked, why are we discussing sport now when we have a crisis? And so to answer your question, and you know I will answer your question, I just want to talk quickly about sport. And I tend to use the cliche, sport is life and life is sport, primarily because of the many life lessons sport offers. And sport, because of this, we have to think through that sport teaches you about self-discipline. It teaches you that you only get out of things what you put in. It teaches you about playing by the rules, and it teaches you about playing in a team, and it teaches you that at least you can have as many failures as you have successes. And that is why sport in terms of its life lessons are so important. But then we ask the question, why is it that we even need to discuss sport in the context of crisis and everything that's happening now? Sport has, I think, and Dr. Mansing and Bruce and Simone and Paulton can correct me, but sport has 4 aspects to it. The recreational side, that everybody who walks, everybody who rides, everybody who jogs, and everybody who drives participates in sport. And the WHO says that in a pre-COVID study, approximately 2 million people a year die from physical inactivity. And so that is the importance of sport, because part of it is that everybody participates in sport. And you have sport as competition. And that's where, we go and compete against each other on different levels and countries and everything else. Then you have sport as entertainment, and where a number of different hats, as the moderator mentioned. And that is probably one where everybody on this call gets involved in, because you're watching sport either on television, well, non-live now in our part of the world, unfortunately. And then you come to that aspect of sport that is professional. And that is where you have less than 1% of people who are actually in sport that actually participate in it. But critically, sport is a path to education. And sport, for many of us in this part of the world, is a path to wealth. I put this context, Madam Moderator, because sometimes I don't believe it's properly understood, not just by government, not just by private sector, but many, in terms of understanding the overall importance of sport. So I'm going to now answer your question. Has this pandemic, has the delay cost us too much? I heard Dustin's response, I heard Bruce, I heard Simone, I heard Walter. As it relates to Jamaica specifically, the Minister of Sport here asked me to participate in compiling a study pre-COVID. Sport contributes, we figure Jamaican dollars, maybe $12–15 billion a year in terms of actual contribution to sport. And we only use the numbers that we could actually get. So you're looking at about 12–15 billion Jamaican dollars annually to sport. As it relates to football has not restarted in Jamaica. One of my tasks is that I actually cover 31 countries throughout the region. And in the vast majority of those countries, football is being played. And unfortunately, it's not being played in a few countries. Jamaica, Trinidad, being one of the few that's not playing. The estimate I would put on the cost in Jamaica of football not being played is in excess of $1.5 billion Jamaican dollars, which would be about what? What's that? A million US, 100 million US. And that would be roughly what the cost would be on playing football. Football is being played throughout all the other countries, and I have to commend Dr. Mansingh and his team for putting together the bubble. But as he and I have discussed on many fora like this, the bubble is going to be, has been necessary, but it's not feasible financially for football. And most of the football that's being played now relies on heavy testing. And in Jamaica, we may even go ahead with a bubble for the Premier League because it's being forced. But most of the leagues now are not being played in a bubble. And in places like Dominican Republic, which hosted all the World Cup qualifiers for the Caribbean recently, they have 10 times the amount of cases and 5 times the amount of deaths in Jamaica, but they hosted all the World Cup qualifiers and they are playing football daily. Consequently, teams in Jamaica have had to withdraw from international competition, and that does not bode well in terms of a year where, as you've said, you have the Gold Cup and you have the World Cup qualifiers. So at the end of the day, the hope is that there is a level of consistency in those regions that have said, just like our partners around the world have said, at this time, you need to focus on returning people to work. So the focus must be on returning professional athletes and elite athletes to work. And if that is indeed the focus, then there's no difference between someone working at a bank, BPO, and working as a professional athlete. And so I wholeheartedly wish, request, and demand the return to sport as quickly as possible. Because COVID is here, and COVID is here to stay with us for a while. As Dr. Mansingh said, and we're going to have to work with it and balance those lives and livelihoods. I apologize for taking so long, but you know me, you left the best for last, so you don't have to take advantage of it. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Howard. I think we have given the persons who are online a considerable amount of information. And just so I was listening to the Prime Minister earlier in his presentation in Parliament, where he has acknowledged some of these things. I know the ministries of sport and local government have all of the requests from all of the sporting bodies, local and international, how to let them coexist and so on. And he has, well, he did say entertainment. He wasn't very clear whether it's creative industries or entertainment and sport, but did commit to at least, looking back at us with regards to how we're going to move forward. It is important. The logistics, I know El Salvador, and those are some things that we have to consider. And for those of us who work in other corporate entities, I want to have the discussion so you can understand the process. If you don't, where from the person starts training, that it is pretty much like you're going to college to train, then you go on an internship, then you get your job and you're competing. And Howard made the point, it is our job. It is our job to look after the elite and the professional athletes and even the amateurs to some extent. And we're gradually increasing. Netball reported that 11 of their possible squad of 25 are plying their trade in international circles. That's considerable. I remember the days we only had one international player playing in the league. So it's not just, and so, even with football, and I know Howard is not representing the Jamaica Football Federation, but so many more of our players are playing internationally now. And so while we have the issue locally, we do have access to elite players that can participate with us once those international competitions go on. I'll take this second, I'll get into a little administration because I figure while we were laying down and just waiting on COVID to go away or even the start of the vaccination process, Dr. Mansing, I'm coming back to you. Is there any important research that has been conducted that you think would, the Prime Minister said, listen, when the doors are open, we need to be ready. What is it that in terms of figures and information that we have gathered during this period that we can share with Jamaica, with the region, to have sports really make a more solid footing forward? Dr. Mansing.
Yes, thank you. A very interesting and difficult question, but let's put it in certain perspective. We heard about our netballers plying their trade in Australia. And that's because Australia and New Zealand in particular, took a very strict view on how they're going to deal with this pandemic. And bear in mind that they're islands just like us. So the control of people in and out of their countries was achievable. And they did just that. They controlled the disease in their countries such that Australia has less number of cases than Jamaica, in spite of it being a continent. And because of that, they're able to return to sport, because one thing we have to accept for all that is said and done is that public health has to get priority. People dying have to be prevented. And that was the focus of everybody's strategy against COVID. Where you could say we might have failed, and I say that because it goes hand in hand with what goes in the country's policy, is that we saw a spike after the Independence and Emancipation Day celebrations last year. We saw a spike after the general elections. And therefore, we knew there was going to be a spike after Christmas. In fact, the minister said, expect a spike. But what we didn't do was to put in measures like the other countries did to stop that spike. And so we ended up with community spread, and we are where we are now. Well, unfortunately, the way it is spread in our communities right now, I guess the only way that we're looking at resumption of safe sport outside of a bubble situation is through mass vaccination. And so you're asking about the figures. We know that if we have herd immunity with vaccination of about 60% of our population, we stand a good chance of getting back to some sort of normalcy. Till then, we're still going to have to practice measures. Track and field practices their measures because they have a certain way of conducting things. That's very good. Football is probably going to come in with their measures. But to have a sort of free, open, spectator-attended event like you have in New Zealand and Australia is now, in this context of what's happening in Jamaica, probably going to require herd immunity. I say that because as well and good as sport is to start back again, our public health includes our hospitals, which are overwhelmed, our health workers, which are overwhelmed, and the burden on the society of people who are getting sick and dying. And we haven't reached a stage of countries where we're turning people away from hospitals and people are dying because they cannot access health care. But we came pretty close to it, and it could easily revert to that again. So to answer you, Carol, in the Jamaican context, if we're not going to go the way of biosecure bubbles and so on for the high-risk sports, it has to be when there's herd immunity. Now remember, everything has to be taken into context. We just held a bubble in Antigua for cricket as well, because even though Antigua was increasing the number of cases. The reason I say that is that there are those countries that believe that you can do rapid testing, frequent testing, but you have to remember that the basic tenets of fighting COVID remain the same all over, which is social distancing, mask wearing, and frequent sanitization. And in those countries that have elite leagues like football leagues, basketball leagues, etc., they still have a large proportion of their roster going down positive with COVID. And sometimes matches are postponed, sometimes matches are played with half-strength teams. But remember, in their scenario, they have players who are paid millions of dollars or pounds, who will reside in a massive house, isolated from people, who will travel to their game and their practice in private cars, and who will not mix with general public. In the Jamaican scenario, the majority of our sports people live in inner city communities or crowded environments, take public transport to get to their sport, and I repeat, public health has to get priority over sport. So we've got to find a way of eliminating that exposure if we're going to start back in a safe way. As I say again, I'll repeat, it has to be through herd immunity, because we're really not getting on top of containment.
All right, you have kind of answered my third question, but I'm gonna wait, because it is important for us that we probably should, somebody like yourself, Dr. Mansing, and I have no doubt that you sit in certain seats of power where you give that kind of advice. But the truth is, are our international bodies helping? But before I go to the next speaker, which is Bruce, how then are we really going to participate? We saw the Miramar Invitational on Saturday, and this is probably a good way to bring Bruce in. We saw the Miramar Invitational. A few of our athletes, the field events athletes did fairly well. As a matter of fact, we had 2 clear winners, but our track athletes, while not looking totally new to the sport, never looked as sharp, but we still had to compete. What then, Bruce, what is the solution from your perspective?
Let me point out, first of all, that I've noticed that both Dr. Mansing and Howard have these backgrounds. I figured I needed a virtual background to match you. I was feeling a little left out. Hopefully, having done that, I'll now be able to match the eloquence of both those gentlemen.
Bruce, you win. You win.
Carol, the reality is it's about training. Have been, for the most part, to train fairly well. And again, everybody, I'm speaking only about track and field. They've been able to train fairly consistently. So the training isn't the issue, it's the competition. And I'm going to disagree, take a big chance and disagree with Big Mac. I mean, Howard says that athletes need to be able to go back to work because it's just like going back to work at a bank or a BPO. I disagree with Howard. I actually think we face less risk in athletics than, I wouldn't want to be locked up in an office every day with air conditioning and people around me. In track and field, you're at the National Stadium in 100,000 square feet of space with 100 other athletes. There is less risk, in my view, on a track than people sitting in an office every day. So I agree with you, Howard. The athletes need to go back to work, and this is their profession. But I disagree that it's the same as the professionals who work in an office. I think, and many of you are probably on this Zoom call, you are at more risk every day at work than athletes are who are running around a track in their own lane. With that said, the other impacts are also on our high school athletes. Howard mentioned, the access to education. every year, numerous track and field athletes leave Jamaica on scholarship to the United States of America. And that has such a multiplier effect on Jamaica and the Jamaican economy and their families. So it's not just the athlete getting a scholarship. And if we look at the recent indoor results at the NCAA indoors, which is a top collegiate competition indoors each year, Jamaican athletes who were here last year this time and are now on scholarship in the States were winning gold medals. Kemba Nelson in the 60 meters, the 60-meter hurdles, we had Akira Nugent. The Jamaican athletes continue to make that impact. And that's why earlier when I spoke about, has the cost been too much? I say not yet. But if we miss champs this year, it'll be 2 years in a row, which will be the first time in the history of boys and girls champs that we have 2 years consecutively where we don't have champs. The cost could become prohibitive for Jamaica.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bruce.
Madam Moderator, Bruce needs to, for our friends from around the region who may not know exactly what champs is.
They all know by now. It is the Inter-Secondary Schools Sports Association Boys and Girls Track and Field Championships. They all watch, and this is
it's been around for
One Spot Media. They all watch.
And it's been around for how many years?
110. And the girls joined in 1999. Anyway.
Girls Champ started in 1957, but they combined the event in 1999, Carol. And let me also point out that we have had not just the 8 Velocity Fest meets so far since COVID started, but the J3s has also put on numerous meets across the island. And in all cases, it's protecting not just the athletes, the coaches who are there, the officials, everybody has to be protected. Everybody is mandated to wear a mask. In fact, the protocols are pages long and everybody had to be trained. So we're not talking about protecting the athletes only, but the officials and the coaches or the media are at risk. Everybody who enters, let's say, the National Stadium, has to follow what Dr. Mangton said. Socially distant, the sanitization, the temperature takes place. Everybody wears a mask. The only time athletes don't wear their mask is when they're actually competing or warming up. So it's about protecting every single body that enters the arena.
And we're talking about personal responsibility. Simone, are you back with us? Because this is
yes, I'm here.
Okay, all right. Talk to us a little bit about those 11 players that are in international circuit, because it is important that back in the day we probably only had one player playing in international, and come now 2021 we're looking at 11, which means we're far more competitive even as one of the top 5. And over the last probably 2 years we have been rotating that where we're beating each other in that top 5. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yes, girl, thanks. So I just want to finish up what I was speaking to you about earlier, just a minute. And the question you're asking is, has it cost us too much? I think for netball, already it has cost us too much. We have not been able to play netball locally for 2 years, or under 21 championship that got canceled in December. That is usually the feeder program into the senior team. That's canceled. The ladies barely started training via Zoom. So they really didn't start training for that championship. So already there is no under 21 feeder program to the senior team. So right now we're in trouble. So it's just a matter of how do we manage to keep those youngsters together, give them the additional work and help that they will need in order to. So there will be a gap for us. That we'll have to figure out as a board, and how is it that we're going to manage around that with COVID and everything else that is happening. Now, as it relates to those 11 young ladies, not all of them are in Australia. I think three of them are in England playing in the Vitality Super League, and then the others are in Australia playing, which of course we all know is the top league in the world. And what Australia does, they take the best players around the world. I mean, Australia has more than the other countries, but they look and they scout the top players in the world and bring them. It's one big pot, melting pot, a global market now. So it's no longer, it's just Australians. It's the best in the world because, of course, broadcast rights and all of that, but that's for another day. So they take them and they have them there and they go to rigorous training sessions with their individual franchises, and then they compete. Now, what that does for Jamaica, and I'm so happy that, we're able to have those youngsters overseas playing, because what that does, it means the others who are here, as I said, we have like 7 or 8 of them in training in Zoom. Those 11 are playing week in, week out, intense competitive netball, those in England and as well as Australia. This goes all the way to August. Now, the international calendar starts in September. So what that means for Jamaica is that even though COVID is here, we have, and I wouldn't even say it's a buffer or a cushion, but we have those ladies who are actively playing the sport, not as a team, but they're each in their teams playing netball, getting training that they are going to need when we come up on the Australians, the South Africans later this year. Now, that is the only saving grace we see so far. Because as it is now, you're right, in the beginning, you're mentioning all the bodies waiting on approvals. And based on what we see happening, I don't foresee that happening before maybe in the summer or thereabout. So it's very, very challenging for the sports. So Bruce, I find track and field is should be open by now if you ask me, because it's more individual event. Netball is bodies hitting, and so it's a lot more, it's harder to sell opening for netball, but there are protocols that we've put in place to ensure that when the Prime Minister says, okay, you have to go ahead, we ensure that we modify rules and modify the game so that we're able to play some netball, because it's having not just socially or psychologically or physical impact on our players, but it is also having a mental effect. We're a social being. We're not used to just sitting inside and just not doing anything. So we have over thousands of young ladies now who are just home not doing anything. So separate and apart from the international calendar and international players and the national team, we have our local ladies who are just at home not doing anything. So we're either home, we're inactive. There are so many things, negative impact it's having on our girls. So I'm really happy that we have those 11, Carol. Yes, it indeed has cost us too much so far, but I really want to see us back out there playing sports. For me, I want to agree with Bruce Les Howard that it's for most of these youngsters, especially the professional athletes, it's their jobs. So while we're putting the different protocols and policies in place for the workplaces, I think we are dropping the ball for athletes, because this is their profession. So I don't believe enough is being done to focus on sports. So yes, Bruce, I'm with you on that one.
All right, I'm gonna actually use my post as moderator to jump. I see an interesting exchange between Dr. Edwards and I see the former president of the J3, Dr. Warren Blake. Let me before I bring them in, and I'd probably like to have them speak, because even this year, Dr. Edwards, there has been 26 locations that has been used over the 3 weeks that track and field was allowed to return. Over $30 million was spent, and there's been no reported breaches. None of those athletes that participated, junior and senior, and who have subsequently traveled to Miramar last week, and some of whom have gone further, have not reported any adverse effects from the COVID, and they're all, well, let me use the word healthy. But Dr. Blake, if you're in a clear area, I'm happy to have you jump in just to address, because I want it to be clear. We are not suggesting that we're putting anybody at risk, but I want us to understand the value, as Howard said, of this industry. It employs close to 30,000 persons, and that is equivalent to teachers and police and the army. And we do bring a considerable amount of contribution to the economic function of this country. So while it seems like sport and it seems like friendly things to do, it is in fact our job. And I'd like Dr. Blake, are you able to speak, sir?
Yes, Carol, I can speak.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm just saying that in terms of the development of the protocols for track and field, we took great effort to develop protocols, and we borrowed from best practices worldwide, and we ensured that coming to a track and field meet was in fact safer than going to crossroads or going to any public office to transact business. The protocols of sanitization, social distancing, mask wearing, we ensured that these were followed rigidly. And if you notice, anybody who had watched the meets, you know that every time someone used that implement, whether it be shot put or javelin or discus, the implements were sanitized. Every time an athlete jumped in the long jump pit, the sand itself was sanitized. The level of sanitization that takes place at these meets is second to none anywhere in the country. If you go to pay your taxes at any tax office across the land, you will see breaches of COVID protocols everywhere. You go into private offices and public offices, you go to the hospital where you'd expect better. You see vast breaches of COVID protocols taking place in the accident and emergency departments and in our clinics. Because I work in a public sector hospital, so I know the breaches that take place at my hospital. So we ensured that these protocols were followed, and we trained hundreds of COVID marshals, trained them for each school. We increased their public awareness of COVID by the amount of people that were trained. And the training we were assisted in the training by the Ministry of Health. And we had seminars twice, 3 times a week, training almost over 1,000 COVID marshals and COVID officers were trained to ensure that the protocols were kept and that people understood the need for these protocols. And all of this thing was put in place before track and field restarted. You speak about the cost to sports. I mean, we just look at something simple as the Olympics or the World Championships when our athletes go on the podium and the Jamaican national anthem is being played. If you were to buy advertising time for those minutes that we get at each meet when we win medals and are on the podium, you'll be spending millions of US dollars for that kind of exposure. And the value to that for our tourism is incalculable. It's sports, it's entertainment that puts Jamaica name on the map and bring the tourist dollars to Jamaica. So there is a knock-on effect of sports on other aspects of the Jamaican economy. And I think we have just lost far too much in this delay, because sports can continue, albeit not in the same old-fashioned way, but it can continue in the pandemic, even with the spike in cases, and continue safely. And I think we should advocate for that.
Thank you, Dr. Blake. I think we underestimate the power of our people. Let me just say that. So the curfew ran out on Sunday. There was no announcement until today. And everywhere was locked up to meet that 8 o'clock deadline without an announcement. The roads were quiet. And so I'm saying, if we trust our people enough, and I've watched as many as the track meets as possible, I've even watched some of the netball training. I've seen whatever little football went on before the closure. And by far, because athletes are naturally disciplined, they come, they put on their bag, they sanitize, they do all this stuff. We are natural disciplined people, but we don't use sport enough to make those points. What we do, we actually use it for the entertainment value a little too much, and only some of us take it seriously. Dr. Blake made some very good points, and Dr. Ed, we're coming to that, Claudette, about the mental. Simone alluded to it for her girls, and I'm going to go to Paulton now to talk about the International Federation, the assistance from the International Federation.
Madam Moderator, just so the point is not lost, the type of disagreement that Bruce and Simone and Dr. Blake to some extent had with me, I am very happy for. That's the type of disagreement, because they are all correct. It is actually less risky. And I just wanted to ensure that that point is made. I wanted to comment quickly on the point made by Dr. Blake in terms of it being incalculable. Actually, Warren, that's not even correct, because it can be calculated, just that we refused in many instances to actually calculate the value of sport, since we are talking about sport here, to the country, and the value of what it means when we're on the podium, or when we're on television. It can be calculated, and it should be calculated, and it's one of the calls that again could come out of this exercise, Madam Moderator, is to call for a study on sports, which repeated across the region in terms of the economic contribution of sport to the economy.
Okay, Howard, and I'll get to it because you started that research many years ago. So you know the economic impact assessment factors that will determine that. I'm going to go back to Paulton. Has FIBA offered any technical or other kind of assistance, even in terms of administration? I know there was some closer look at things like governance and so on, Paulton. Any kind of assistance from FIBA at all that has helped the Jamaica Basketball Association?
Yeah, we have gotten some help from FIBA. The first intervention was they provided us with some information regarding creating a protocol document. And so we fine-tuned that document, looked at our local situation, and made a submission to the ministry. But again, you know that we can't be following that to a T because the circumstances are different, and the resources are different, the conditions are different. So we used their guidelines to flesh out our document so that we could have submitted that to the Ministry of Sports. It created a little bit of issue because there was they wanted a kind of generic approach, which we couldn't provide for them. So we had to change and switch a few things there, and we were back and forth with the ministry. Ultimately, what we decided to do, Carol, is to, because we are high risk, we decided to present as part of what we did, a 3-on-3 version of basketball, which requires less persons, less overall support parties. The ministry liked that in October, November, and we are about to do that in December. And then the Ministry of Health, because of the spike, decided that it's a no-go. In the other areas of support that we got from FIBA, FIBA Americas, would be in terms of training and seminars. We have had 4 referee seminars between June to February of this year. And I must commend some of our coaches who have taken that on. The issue though is that there has to be a practical component of some of those training, and the instructors are actually waiting on opening up so that we can implement that section of it. And we have had about 3 referees and table official coaching seminars. Again, that's from the CBC and also FIBA America. So we have gotten some support in that regard, and we are quite grateful for that.
All right, thank you very much. And that's important because, for example, I know some of the football teams or football associations have gone through administrative changes. Just so you know that governance has been a thing, and over the last year or so, a lot of associations, regionally, international, have gone through some changes. I know it is not my place and it is not my club, but happy birthday, Paulton. I know you never wanted anybody to know, but today you're celebrating your birthday.
All right, thanks.
I'm gonna go to Howard now because football kind of never really stopped globally, and with the World Cup and the Gold Cup and all those other things. What kind of support FIFA and the CONCACAF will continue to provide to the region to ensure that going into 2022, 2023, that that football is allowed to continue as still the most popular sport in the world? How does FIFA and CONCACAF relate to the smaller countries, although they each have equal votes at the table? What kind of assistance is available?
Thanks for the question, Carol. In terms of specific assistance, first, FIFA started with financial assistance. FIFA gave each of its 211 members $1 million US for COVID relief and 500,000 for women football. So 1 million for the general and 500,000. Then, and CONCACAF did the same, definitely not at the level that FIFA did, but CONCACAF also contributed in terms of financial contributions to each and every MA. CONCACAF has 41 members. In addition to that, FIFA developed protocols that could be used by all of the member associations. CONCACAF did the same, UEFA did the same, and the places like the US developed its own set of protocols. So all of these protocols have actually been developed and shared with the Federation here, and have also been shared with the governments around the region and definitely here in Jamaica. And it is those protocols that are followed and include all of what Dr. Mansing described to ensure that each territory could develop a set of protocols. Actually, Jamaica, and I think I'm correct, is the only English-speaking Caribbean that actually hosted an international football game in November last year here. And, kudos need to go out to Kiwanis and Lloyd Distant, who is working at the local level in terms of the protocols and stuff for the league. And the game was held under those protocols. And this is why it's a little bit unfortunate and disappointing that coming out of that, and everybody was there, all of the agencies were there, ODPM, Ministry of Health, everybody was there. Coming out of that, there was any follow through to ensure that other games were actually held, or that the local league was not allowed to be played. And now, as I understand it, well, I definitely understand it, that they're pursuing a bubble concept led by Dr. Mansing, which is where it has to go, because that's what is required based on the strictures of the government here. So we'll see what happens in terms of that and the announcement of that, hopefully shortly. But the protocols are there, followed to the T. They're fully available. They're available on websites and everything else. The assistance continues, and you've had more seminars and webinars than ever before in going through protocols, governance, and all of that over the last year plus.
All right. So I think at this stage, we're going to probably take some questions, because I think we've given the group a tremendous amount of information. We are aware of a list of established competition guidelines for several levels of sport. I know all the sporting bodies and the teams represented here have their documentation ready. I am secretary for a cricket club. I get the updates every day, so I know what's happening. I know what has been proposed, what the responses are. And to use a local term, as soon as the gate is flyed, we should all be ready. But I see the comments in the chat, and I appreciate, just to say, Dr. Edwards, that sport is an element of this national society that is, though recreational in some instances, is growing into a professional, or has grown into a professional grouping. There are other contending factors that speak to the national psyche of the people. And we cannot, in our right mind, without the decoration of sport as a sector, actually want now sport to fix the issues that national health, national security, and some of the other things have not done. And, I'm not going to use the Kiwanis platform to argue, but things like communicable diseases, obesity, and all those other things that have now come to the fore in reporting cases of COVID about the term that they call comorbidities and underlying factors, we have seen where we really have essentially not taken care of ourselves. And some of us, I don't want to make the assumption, but I taught physical education from 1989 for a couple of years. And some of them, when I meet them in the corporate structure, some of the people who used to hide from PE classes because they never thought it was important. So now everybody wants to exercise. And while some of it is recreation, some of us do that for a living. Some of us do that to get our degrees. So we have to balance our lives, sir. And some of us who are here, or ma'am, I'm not sure, doctor, this is male or female, have to recognize the value of the sector to economic, but also to social and mental. I'm gonna take some questions. Could you just show your hands? And I'll acknowledge you. I hope I've covered some of the questions or some of the concerns that you may have. And I'll take some questions now. And obviously Dr. Blake is on as a resource, so feel free. Olive, I don't know if the May meet is on. Bruce indicated that the J3 will be sending a team to Poland, which that is May 1. And I know Poland announced because they were thinking, I know World Athletics was considering postponing it, but it is on, and Jamaica, as far as I know, will send a team. Is there any burning question that you'd like to ask? And maybe some of our colleagues from the media who are online. It is already phase resumption, Dr. Edwards. Low risk, medium risk, high risks. We are all aware, and we have said that. That was the first statement Dr. Mansing made regarding the sports. Horse racing is a whole other ball game, no pun intended. Any questions, any comments? We would have covered just over an hour, and we're probably targeting 8:30 for the end of this session.
Carol, I see a number of hands that are raised. I see Olive and somebody named Alan with their hand up.
All right, Olive, make your comment and or question.
Well, good evening, Carol, and good evening, the panelists and all persons on. I just wanted to make my comment as well on the fact that, yes, we have a public health concern and COVID-19 is here with us, but sports do play a very important part in not only professional athletes, but as you know, the sports persons, the physiotherapists, the massage therapists, all of those persons are certainly without work now. Physical education teachers, the people that cook lunch for Champs and other places. But I just heard that Mr. Mills again just announced that the Racers Track Meet has been cancelled. So that is again another because of the uncertainty. And I hope that you all can continue to lobby to ensure that we have Champs this year. Right? And the question is, how can horse racing continue? And they just shift the date. So why can't track and field have the excellent protocols that were put in place, as Dr. Blake said? Why can't we continue to have track and field as we did earlier, even during the week as well? And, you know,
I'm not going to speak on behalf of the government. I wouldn't try to do such thing. But based on the extension of the curfew, with the reduction of the time inside, I presume from that some of the in the week meets could possibly be held. I know the Prime Minister was very coy in his presentation when he touched on that part. So I'm thinking that something could come this week. And I guess we'll continue to press. All the documentations are in.
Carol, could I just make a point based on what's being said regarding Champs? Bruce had stated how important it is for the onward education and mobility of many of the athletes going forward. And sometimes we may have to think about compromises. My suggestion is that instead of having Champs as a whole or cancelling Champs as a whole, at least have the Class 1 competition take place, so that those who are in line for scholarships, etc., get a chance to display their works. Now, after that, you can look at Class 2, Class 3, Class 4, but the most critical group is Class 1. And perhaps one way of going about is use all the protocols that track and field is using, but do it for Class 1 to start with. and then we can bring in the others if need be. So there has to be a bit more mobility than all or none.
Bruce, how many athletes would class 1 entail? Because I know you have the numbers stashed right in your side of your head.
Sure, Carol. There are 2 ways to look at it. At a normal champs, we'd have 3 rounds of the 100, 3 rounds of the 200, rounds of long jump, discus. For the modified champs, we don't need to have the 80 boys in the 100 entered. I can say, all right, the top 16 come and do a semi-final, and we take 8 to the final. Or if we really want to press and we limit the amount of people inside the stadium, let's take the top 8 across the island in each event. So we don't need to have the normal 2,000 student athletes at champs that we have every year. We could limit it to 200. And whether we do Dr. Mansing's proposal of class 1 only or all the classes, every final has a maximum of 8 people in the case of sprints and the jumps and throws. We do not have to have 2,000 athletes there. And in terms of the officials are so spread out. You're not having this, the social distancing is so easy to achieve. When you're officiating, starting a race, the starters alone on the rostrum, the photo finish people are distance away. There's so many ways to get it done. I'd rather focus on solutions rather than it appears some people prefer to focus on the problems. When there are problems, let's find a solution.
Right.
If I can jump in, Carol, I think the call is for critical, creative thinking in this time and consistency in terms of policy. You see the questions even being asked by Olive and others in relation to horse racing and all of that. If we're saying professional sports, elite athletes, and think creatively about how to put it on. Just like Doc mentioned and Bruce is saying, it can be done. We just this weekend, CONCACAF hosted, and the tournament just started last week. 5,000 persons attended a game in Nicaragua. Right? We now have fans attending games in these different territories. Now, I'm not saying that we must follow suit. I think a number of the proposals that have been put forward speak to not having spectators at this time. We are, for the most part, practicing, especially in sport, social distancing, the mask, the following of the protocols, because we have guidelines, international experience, all of that is there. We now just have to think creatively and just have a different approach. And the will, because there's a feeling that, because of our historical contextualization of sport, that, that's just a hobby and, it should put it back in the line. And in no way, just to ensure that Dr. Mansing and others know, we recognize the public health crisis, and we're not in any way saying that we should not give priority consideration to that. And again, I did not say, which I normally say, all my presentations, now commending all the frontline workers for the tremendous work they're doing on behalf of all of us. But what we are saying is to give proper consideration to sport, especially at the professional and elite level, which is consistent with a return to work and the proper considerations in terms of the impact it is having economically, psychologically. I have never bailed as many footballers that I've had to bail over the last year, because many of them are turning to criminal activity.
And that's for a whole other session. We have to take that outside of Kiwanis. Paul, I don't think nobody was suggesting that only 8 people got a chance. On average, we have 2,000, and we're saying if class 1 is 150 students, run them in the rounds and get them to rest. The stadium can seat 30,000 people. And if you have 300 people in the stadium, they can sit all in one row for the entire place. The truth is, we have the space, we have the time. We have had drive-through. I've seen people stand up in lines to get vaccinated. we can do it. And if it's one thing I can tell you, we watch Antigua host Sri Lanka. They hosted the regional 4-day just now, and no breaches have been reported out of Antigua. They're all, I see the cricketers are gone to the IPL and so on. And so the solution has to be reached. And if it's one thing I can tell you, from July 23 to whenever Olympics finish, you think anybody going to say, boy, Elaine never run, never warm up enough and so on when she not get the medal? The truth is, the aspirational side of it is that there's value to our psyche where we want to feel good about our athletes. Think about the EPL that we all get up and watch every weekend, and we all used to stay home now. Everybody can access it on the smartphones. And there's an opportunity for streaming. So there are business opportunities. And Alan, the person who is Alan, had a question because I really want to have closing statements.
Yes, good evening. Yeah, good evening, everybody. Dr. Mansingh made a very valid point about breaking up champs, and it's something that I think is an excellent point, and we really need to look out of the box. And I heard Mr. McIntosh speaking about the same thing as well too. I mean, think of, for example, you could have maybe the class 1 at one stadium, class 2, or on the same day that you have the class 1 competing, you could have the 100 and 200 maybe at the stadium, the 400 and 800 at JC. So I do think that's an excellent point. One of the points that Dr. Mansingh made earlier, which I'm not sure I heard the answer, and maybe you could follow up on it, is the issue of some of the concern having nothing to do with the sport, but having to do, how do I get to the sport? Where do I go? I go home after. What's the transportation? What's the accommodation? So I don't think I really heard a solution to that, Dr. Mansingh. Maybe you can make a suggestion, because it's something that I've heard in other places as well, as to the fact that it's nothing actually about when I get to the stadium and Sir James has his meet and everything is good there. It's what happens in between the time the athlete leaves home and that. So maybe somebody could speak to that issue, because I'm hearing that issue actually more than the sport issue.
Well, I certainly can't give the answer, but I can start the discussion rolling, and 2 or 3 things to it. Since Carol was talking about international bodies and support, and all the associations talking about getting support, I just wanted to make a point about giving support, because sitting on the ICC Medical Advisory Panel, I just wanted to point out that we had actually set up documents from June of last year, and I've been updating it constantly to not just guide the elite teams, but we have cricket playing down to G and F, G, H, I think J League, where you have some countries that are so small you wouldn't even believe that they're playing cricket. When I say small in cricket, that they play cricket, and we have to advise all of them according to their realities. The reason I bring this up is that there are 2 approaches. One is a top-down and the other is a bottom-up, meaning that there's an opportunity where the ministry can actually come forward, use the best minds in the country to come with proposals for all the sports and say, this is how we'd like you to conform and adapt, and have the sports then do that, as opposed to have every sport come with their own plan and then have to sort of sift through it and say, well, yours can work, this can't happen, etc., etc. I say that in the context of your question, Alan, because clearly Bruce and Warren, probably Dr. Blake, are more qualified to speak of what happens near track meets and who comes and how they go. But once again, let's just repeat, and I'm sorry to say this, but we have to do it, a million times if we have to. Social distancing, mask wearing, and hygiene, the 3 tenets of preventing this thing even after you've gotten the vaccine. And so even if we're faced with a scenario of people having to do that, see how we can spread it out. It may mean busing in people, especially. So the netball team, for example, will be picked up in a bus and brought in and sent back home in a bus, because you want to keep them away from the sort of general crowded buses, etc. It may mean, the government has given houses to various sports. It may mean bringing them in for a small period of time to allow intensive training. So you can bring them into a mini bubble, if you want to call it that. They come in, they make sure they're not infected, etc. They stay there for a week. They do all the training they have to do, and then they come in specialized ways. One thing I would suggest, Carol, if you have the time, is to ask Andre Coley, the Jamaica cricket coach, how he managed in June, July of last year, because they had a fantastic plan, which I thought worked beautifully. And it was innovation within the sphere of getting guidance from the ICC and yet applying it to your local scenario. So I hope I've answered half of your question, Rick. I can't answer the whole of it.
All right, Andre, if you're able to speak, I know he's in the room, so if you're able to respond, please do so. And I will have a response for President Dervin with regards to football and the communities. Andre, are you able to?
Good evening, everyone. Similar to some of the sports that would have had the international bodies outline protocols and so on, the ICC would have put out a set of protocols. Cricket West Indies also put out a set of their own protocols. And we did a combination of them in a similar way that it was suggested that you probably could break up champs. We had to obviously break up training because we never had the permission to train as a full team. So utilizing the facilities at Sabina Park, we did it with small groups, being monitored by different coaches in such a way that we could monitor everyone so that the protocols were being observed. So we did that for about 3 months on and off because we had to take a number of breaks over a 6-month period. But we were able to break up the different components of the game, the fitness and the cricket specific side of things, to be able to get the players training. And then we did some satellite things outside of Sabina Park where we were able to manage that as well on apps and so on. But in terms of Sabina Park being the training base, we basically broke up the players in different groups, and we monitored it throughout. So we were able to prevent any spread. We did record one case during the period, but because of how we were managing the entire thing, what we did is that particular player that tested positive, we just stopped that group. Everybody was tested. Everybody else came back negative. But because the groups weren't interacting with each other, nobody else from the other groups were infected. So the training continued regardless. So I think we would take our learning from that, as well as we have had the opportunity, as actually I mentioned, about being involved in international and regional bubbles. So just listening to some of the feedback in the room so far. I mean, there are quite a few innovative ideas that have come out so far. So we do have the answer and the solutions in the room here.
And also outside, I would also suggest that, and I know he wouldn't have a problem. Michael Hall has been operations for CPL, and he and his team would have officially run a decent tournament, and he's Jamaican. So when Dr. Mansing said the best minds, they're all here. We just need one true leader to get us all together. And that's the truth. The other thing is I'd like to address President Dervin when he speaks about football. Sir, if you take a look at our Premier League clubs and where they originate, I don't have to tell you that they're from the inner city communities. And if they're not playing, if they're not competing, the social interactions and the mental stress that they undergo in their respective homes, they don't set out to be criminals, but it is our reality, sir. And while some sport is able to socially make their athletes more socially adjustable to society, we aren't always we don't always do pretty good at that. Howard made a point that he has had to bail, and sometimes it's domestic abuse happen uptown, downtown, crosstown, around town. So don't knock our athletes. It has been what, close to 500 days that we have been under restricted living, one way or the other. This has never happened in the last 100 years. So it is new for all of us, and we're all going to get through it together. I've made some notes of some of the recommendations. What I hear Andre just spoke about, wearing my HR hat, it is telecommuting, it is work from home, it is reporting on site. And offices with open spaces have used that. Essentially, they have had a roster, and the top floor comes in today, or 3 from the top floor, 3 from the middle floor, and they have rotated people. And if one has been tested on a particular floor, then it is sanitized. So, you know, sports has the answers. It does. And I'm saying again, and I will make the recommendation, but people are in here that have influences. And part of it that we thought we would share. So while we're giving information about employment and impact and so on, it is important that you understand. It is about 8:30. So what I'm going to do is go around our panel and ask them to close. And if they have any other solutions that they think would warrant how their respective sport or even another sport or the industry at large can benefit in this pandemic. I'll save you for last, Dr. Mansing, this time around, because you have really offered tremendous help. And I'll probably have Simone go first. What is your ideal for netball going forward? Is Simone still in the room? Or, all right, Paulton, you probably want to go.
Yeah, all right. Well, one of the concerns we have, which I think most persons share, is the fallout from the lack of opportunities from a scholastic standpoint. We estimate that between 40 and 50 youngsters would have gotten scholarships for basketball, both in local institutions and overseas institutions. And this will be the second cycle that they weren't able to access those opportunities. So we are very, very concerned about that. We'll have to find a way to showcase these youngsters. Usually we have the Star Search camp in the summer, where the scouts come. They would have seen them in action during their high school period. But the summer camps is one of the things that we want to have starting this summer, in fact, to ensure that we can showcase some of our players. We'll also want to have, in terms of shared ideas, in terms of protocol. I know track and field is at the forefront of that, but we want to ensure that the other organizations will benefit from understanding the protocols in real time, in action during an event. So we don't want that to be shared among the other associations. As I mentioned before, we want to open up using that 3-on-3 version. And the protocol speaks to what we would do in terms of ensuring that we rotate teams in and out in secure venues. And we have detailed that to the ministry. Again, I think the Ministry of Sports understand what we want to do and are in full agreement. So we're keeping our fingers crossed. It just requires a managed environment. The government needs to look at specific venues and say, these are the venues we want to use for a particular sport. And we ensure that all the protocols, all the systems are in place to protect athletes and to protect support groups who are helping the sport to move along. So those are some of the things that we want to see in the short to medium term.
All right, thank you, Paulton. I'll go to Howard. I'm switching up the order. So Howard, what's your ideal thing for football, probably from your standpoint, or even for Jamaica, if possible?
I like to speak about sport generally, and definitely regionally. First, I think I've really enjoyed the discussion tonight, and I think there are some good ideas. I'm hoping that all the protocols that exist can be consolidated at some point and actually be looked at as a way and approach for Jamaica, for the region, to look at how all sports can restart. Because I think that's what we want to do. Football is being played very much globally. And it's being played in our region in Central and North America. Football is definitely being played in a controlled environment. We need to get there fast. We need consistency in terms of the policy and adhering to protocols. I'm one of those people that I say, and I'll just give you a leadership quote for the day as I conclude. There's always an upside to every crisis. It usually revolves around having to do the things we've avoided for far too long. I'm hoping that out of this comes a lot of good and a way that a way forward that says, here is how we're going to make sports an industry, not only in Jamaica, but throughout the region.
Thank you, Howard. Bruce, Dr. Martin will have, and yes, Dr. Blake, I'm seeing your recommendations. The meeting is being recorded, so Carolyn and I will coordinate the things that are important, and we'll send a report for what it's worth through the proper channel. Bruce, what's your ideal thing for track and field? Juniors, seniors, elite, amateurs?
Sure. Today, before this meeting, I met at the National Stadium with representatives of the Ministry of Health to go through the protocols that we have proposed for Velocity Fest 9 this weekend and to receive their recommendations. So this is not something that we're doing just from a sport perspective, and we love sports and we love athletes and we want sports to continue. We're doing this in a responsible manner, meeting with the Ministry of Health representatives whose interest is the public health. They're not there because they love sports or anything else. They're there to protect Jamaica's public health. And so, number one, from certainly an MVP track and field club perspective, we want to work with the authorities who are the experts at public health. And we put forward our protocols. They agreed with some, they disagreed with others, and I'm hoping to get the approval within the next 24 hours. So number one, be responsible in how we reintroduce sports, including working with the experts in the Ministry of Health. Number two, I'm going to address something that Dr. Blake and other people have raised. We love spectators, we want spectators, and the sport needs spectators. However, for now, we are satisfied if our spectators are sitting behind screens. The spectators don't have to be inside the stands for us to earn from the sport. There are lots of people who would be happy to advertise with a sport if they know that there are many eyes there. So the 2 points I'd close with, Carol, and thanks to everybody for having me. Number one, do this responsibly. We are working, as I said, today I met with many members of the Ministry of Health at the stadium. And two, let's keep the spectators there, but keep them on the screens as opposed to in the stands. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Carol, I know you say you're saving the best for last, Dr. Mansing. So I think I should
you're back. Oh, sorry, I didn't know you were back.
Hi, Dr. Mansing. All right, so I'm sitting here and I'm listening to the persons from the different bodies, and I find myself thinking there is one big general protocols for businesses. There's basketball here, football, netball, and track and field, and each of us have our own individual protocols document, which means sports is, yes, it's one big industry, but we're cut up. So it's not a one size fits all. It's what is tailored to your particular sport. And so much work is being done by the different administrations to ensure that we get some sports back, so that our athletes can not only earn, but just the general public can participate in sports. And us at netball, we just two things. Our leagues and the young women in Jamaica are suffering greatly because of lack of activities and lack of just enjoying playing the sport. And so we really hope that, yes, we submitted a document, it has been accepted, but we were told that nothing will be approved until the numbers are down. So we're hoping that, seeing that the numbers are coming down or has fallen, that some attention can now be given to not just the individual sports, but the team sports that have submitted these modified documents. And that is really just one thing. That's the one thing I would love to see, that more attention is given to sports and or different sports so that our athletes can get back out there. And I believe, again, it's the safest if we're going to compare indoors or outdoors.
Thank you, Simone. So, Dr. Mansing, you have heard all the comments, and I know your opening statement could very well be your closing, but I'd just like to add that pretty much like the businesses, there are some businesses that are low risk, medium risk, and high risk. And I don't want to make comparisons, but a BPO could be a high risk in terms of a business, like the contact sport. So, and if a BPO can open, even with, as Alan said, transportation to go back home, which we have more secure or coordinated transportation to get our athletes back and forth. I think that it is only hopeful that the recommendations we put forward. So with that, Dr. Mansing, I know your closing statement will kind of just put all of that together so that our people can understand the importance and the value of how much more it could cost us if we don't restart.
Well, Carol, that could have just been the closing statement right there. So I'm just going to very quickly summarize. The importance of sport, that's going to take another 3.5 hours to discuss with regards to its health aspects, its social aspects, its criminal aspects, its educational aspects, etc., etc. So we'll keep that for the next Kiwanis meeting. One thing I can tell you, having been in dialogue with 7 ministries of health around the globe and having worked out protocols that satisfy them, I can tell you 2 things. One is that we're not that different from everybody else in that there's some generalities that go across the board and there's some specifics that you have to be aware of in your own country setting. And as I said, we've gone from New Zealand and Australia, which have not got any cases, to places like England, which was the 2nd most infected country in the world at the time, and Bangladesh, which was fairly high in their incidence. So everywhere has a general sort of similarity, and then you've got to deal with the specifics. I'm going to switch to my cynical side to say that if we didn't start sport when our caseload was low, it's not very likely that we're going to start when the caseload is high. And though Simone is saying that the numbers are coming down, the positivity rate is still 25%. But I say that to say that if the ministry and the technocrats and the bureaucrats have not done it now, then maybe it's time to have an overall forum that looks at starting back sport with taking all the minds that we have in Jamaica, which expand beyond our shores, to pull this together. I'm going to stop on a positive note by saying that, like Howard, I'm very regional and international in thinking, and we actually have some positives that we actually haven't looked at. For example, we have more hotel rooms than the rest of the Caribbean put together. We are a place which is ideal for setting up bubbles so that sports from international fields can come here, be in a bubble situation. We have facilities that can facilitate them, and we can actually put on a spectacle with a backdrop like you have there, Carol, which is one of the best scenes in the world. So we should actually be looking to make a profit off of this by using our resources, which is our hotels, our lovely facilities, our connectivity to the world, and start promoting, attracting international people. So as much as I'm hurt by hearing that Racers Track Meet is cancelled, remember that the IPL last year moved from India to Dubai because they had to play it and they needed a place to play. From a regional perspective, we can hold regional competitions in lovely bubbles, which would probably attract sponsorship because we have the wherewithal to do so. Antigua showed us how it could be done. We can do it at a magnitude that none of these countries can do. So the positive note is we can actually turn our hand, make fashion, and we can make a business of this. But we've got to get our best minds to get together and talk and put out guidelines for the associations, not the other way around. All I've heard all evening is that people have sent their proposals, but actually it should have been the other way around, in my opinion. So there's a lot of positive gains. I think we do need to look at how to start back sport because this is not going away. We do need to achieve our herd immunity, and we're going towards that, but we're limited obviously by the number of vaccines we have. But it can start, it should start, but we have to be innovative, we have to be open, and we have to be collective in our efforts.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mansing. All I'll add is that Kingston has 3,500 rooms, and if you add UA, 6,000. Trelawney has 4,000. Montego Bay has 11, and the rest, that adds up to the 30,000 rooms. So yes, Dr. Mansing, I agree with you wholeheartedly. And Carolyn sits in the Ministry of Tourism, so she knows I'm taking figures. And we have centers across the island, Montego Bay, the Convention Center, open, closed. We have Trelawney, we can fix it up to do something. We have venues across the island, and the hotel rooms are very close to where they are. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been a tremendous opportunity we have had to share. It's been almost, 2 hours of solid information. Your sport experts came out for the Kiwanis Club of Eastern St. Andrew, my apologies, and President Lydia and her team. Thank you so much for inviting us. You have secured people from all across the world. I have people in England that waited up. I see people from Canada, Antigua, Barbados. And so this has been a good discussion that we have had. I trust your team has learned, and we thank our media partners for their ongoing support. We want sports to continue. We think it is important, but we want to do so responsibly. Thanks to the panelists, Ms. Simone Forbes, Bruce James, Paulton Gordon, whose birthday is today, so he spent the better part of his birthday with us. Bruce James, Howard McIntosh, and of course, Dr. Akshay Mansingh. I think Jimmy Adams is also on. He's gonna kill me for calling his name, but he'll join later. Thanks so much again to the Kiwanis Club, and I trust you learned a whole lot. This is Carol Beckford saying good evening to everybody.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you. That was awesome. But the job to do the vote of thanks really rests with DP Keisha. DP Keisha, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, panelists, members of the audience, fellow Kiwanis and friends. Kiwanis Club Eastern St. Andrew is very thankful to everyone for having joined this evening at the meeting. We'd love to say thank you to all the panelists and the leader of the discussion, Madam Moderator. Madam Moderator Carol Beckford, lovely to see you. As you taught me PE in high school, and I did not hide from you. You are always such a pleasant soul, and you were a beautiful, beautiful host tonight in the way you involve all the panelists. Thanks for highlighting the discipline for people who continue to follow all the protocols. Actually, I don't think they realized during the time when we didn't have a curfew during that gap when the Prime Minister hadn't announced. So thank you so much for doing such an excellent job tonight. And also moving along to our next panelist, Mr. Bruce James. Thank you so much for sharing with us on Velocity Fest and how so many countries may have been able to undertake leagues in bubbles, not to work from, not to work from Mr. James, not having to change your background. And you didn't really have to, as your background is quite lovely. We loved it. We really loved your perspective that persons sitting in the office are far more at risk than athletes running in their own lane. Thank you for embracing Mr. Mansingh's proposal, actually, of having champs in classes, and we look forward to such suggestions being implemented to have sports reinstated. Thanks for reaffirming our audience that the stakeholders in sports industry are moving progressively and they're professionals. Thanks, Mr. James.
Thank you.
Forbes from Netball. Thank you for sharing with us on the current status of netball in Jamaica. We're saddened by the fact that there has not been any netball due to it being categorized as a high risk game. We're in support of the athletes and officials, and like you, we too look forward to the athletes in the sport getting back out there. Thanks for sharing on the attention given to the sport and putting forward your paper with the measures to be put in place for netball in Jamaica. We appreciate it. Mr. Paulton Gordon, thank you for sharing with us on the current status of basketball. And we're so saddened by the fact that there hasn't been basketball due to that being a high-risk game similar to netball. But we too are in support of the sport similar to netball. We hope the players, referees, officials, and everyone can be back on play soon. We're happy that the association did such a thorough approach to the policy put forward, and commendations to the referees attending the seminars. Basketball like netball, only wait for the government to fly the gate. So a wonderful birthday to you, actually, Mr. Gordon. There may be a curfew on the street, but the night is still young, so you can still home.
All right, thanks.
We look forward to the opening of the sport on 3-on-3 version, as you mentioned. Mr. Howard McIntosh. Thank you for sharing the validation of the importance of sports in Jamaica. Sports, as you've mentioned, is professional, necessary recreation, and much principles can be learned from the sport as it's a valuable tool to education. The figures you shared are quite interesting, figures of losses from not playing sport of over $1.5 million. It's sad due to the negative impact. You also incited that there's hope that could be possible from the returning of the professional athletes to work, considering that Domeric hosted the World Qualifiers and they had just as much negative impact. You spoke quite well on alternative measures that could be implemented and guidelines. And the point of critical thinking to solve our problem was so important, and it did not go on the floor. We heard it. That's very important. And for confirming that sport is not just recreation. We hope that a lot of good will come out of the crisis. So thank you so much, Mr. McIntosh. And
welcome, thank you.
You're welcome. Dr. Angshai Mansingh, thank you so much for sharing priorities for sports and the valuable input that due to the virus, we've had to really prioritize health over sports as a perspective. And thank you for your guiding us tonight on the priorities the nations have had to take in moving us through COVID-19. You really brought quite valuable input also. You indicated quite importantly that the ministry could allow industry members to put forward proposals as they too are experts in their own right. You also suggested that we could implement small bubbles, importance of wearing, mask, sanitizing, distancing as usual. Instead of having champs on a whole, let's have it according to classes. That would be great, especially for the prospects who could get scholarships in class 1. So thank you so much for that. And thanks for highlighting that we are now really no different from everyone else in the world. We have a great sporting industry that could be back up running safely once everything is in place. Panelists and Madam Moderator, it's been echoed in the chat that you've really offered us an excellent forum. Your gifts are certificates of appreciation, bamboo straws and bamboo notepads. We do hope that you enjoy them. Thanks for the input, Dr. Edwards, Dr. Blake, Mr. Coley, and all the others who added to the meeting, and for your clarifications provided. Thanks to over 200 Kiwanis family members, guests, sports industry participants, media personnel, other stakeholders in the industry, and persons from around the world for joining us tonight. There's hope for amateur and professional athletes. The Blitz vaccination is happening now. Maybe it could be done for the sports athletes next to allow the quickest resumption. You never know. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you very much, DP Keisha. That was a lovely summary and a beautiful vote of thanks. Well appreciated. I still, just for hand to the president, I want to recognize a few people in the audience. Dear G.E. Fireman at Night. I would associate it with football, Dear G, Lloyd Distant, and of course, LG Don On. And I want to recognize Mr. Donald Quarry. No, you don't want to be recognized. And members of the media, thank you so much in addition for coming out. I take great pleasure in handing back the meeting to President Lydia.
Thank you very much, LGD Carolyn. And I must add my thank you to the presenters,